everyone, and welcome back to another episode of On Condition, the Flight Test Safety Podcast. I'm your host, Art Tomasetti. I just returned from the Society of Experimental Test Pilots annual symposium and banquet in Anaheim, California, and it was a tremendous event. We had 2.5 days of technical presentations covering everything from testing airplanes on ice to digital engineering to flying a P-51 Mustang. In addition to that, we had great guest speakers, Alan Eustace talking about his skydive from the stratosphere, and Jared Isaacman talking about the future of manned spaceflight. And of course, my favorite portion of the event is connecting with friends and colleagues from around flight tests in the aerospace world to catch up and exchange ideas. And I want to especially thank everyone who came up to me to talk about the podcast. Your feedback is tremendously appreciated. And I was able to make some connections for future podcasts that I think will bring us some interesting and relevant topics. And we're going to dive right into this month's focus topic, critical incident response. And we're going to hear from one of the leading experts on the subject. While those of us in aviation and any high-risk endeavor are familiar with the effort we put into preventing accidents, we all accept that they do from time to time happen. And if you've been in a flying organization, you've probably heard the term the pre-mishap plan or the mishap plan. And this is basically the guide or the steps you take in the event that a mishap occurs. And it's the practical stuff. Things like ensuring that notifications are sent out, ensuring that the site is secure, all those practical things that need to happen in the aftermath of a mishap. But what about the people-oriented things? What about managing the stress and the long-term effects for those in and around the accident and connected to it? Well, that's where critical incident response comes in. My guest today will guide us through understanding what critical incident response is and how it can be used. So usually on the podcast, I am joined by people I have known for a long time, but today this is someone I had met, I think it was either 9 or 10 years ago, on the stage at the Society of Experimental Test Pilots Awards banquet, where my guest, Louise Cullinan, received the Friend of the Society Award. And I think that was the first time you and I ever met, and it was brief. I know of you, I've heard of you every year since then because you've been involved with the Society and some of the things we do. But Louise, thank you for joining us today. And if we could start off with you just giving a little bit of your background for our listeners.
Hey, I've been an airline pilot since 1999. I'm now on my second airline flying. I started the critical incident response after a fatal accident at my first airline and worked with my union for many years, becoming a national chair at my pilot union. Okay. Also being part of the international group of pilots and that union there for the Human Factors Committee.
Right.
Obviously, my specialty was the peer-to-peer portion of that.
Right. So can I ask though, so what interested you in flying? Was it something as a child you wanted to do, or what was it that brought you to the world of aviation?
It was being a child. I'm originally from England. And when we first came to the States when I was a kid, being on that aircraft and coming over the ocean was such a big deal to me. And I think I fell in love with the whole concept, particularly the airline world back then. I hadn't really thought about becoming a pilot. I didn't even think it was possible. I have nobody in my family who's in aviation. Yeah. My father had a great love of aircraft, and we had many books in his library on planes and flying, but he never learned to fly. I was pretty tired of graduate school in a completely different area of writing and packed my bag and came out to be a ski bum in Steamboat Springs. I fell in love with Steamboat after being here for a few years. And when I started to apply for jobs that used my degree, it was very scary and depressing to find that I didn't want to do any of that, and a bit of a horror on all this education that I had now wasted on that. So I really started to decide what what would interest me. And I thought about going out to the local airport in Hayden, Colorado, and seeing if maybe they could use an agent out there and I could get flight benefits to be able to go home to England, was my original. And I got very lucky. The positions back then didn't come up often, but there
Right.
was one available. And they had me show up the next day at 5 a.m. And they taught me how to marshal in an aircraft. And the first time I marshaled in an aircraft, it hit me. And I thought, I don't want to be out here. I want to be in there.
Yeah.
So that's what sent me on my path of completely changing. And I went to flight school down in New Mexico and went through a program that sent me on a course for 18 months from private all the way through to multi.
Wow. That's
Hmm.
awesome. That's,
Yeah.
okay. So on this podcast, and through my time as a pilot, a lot of the focus when we talk about an incident or a mishap is before it happens, doing everything we can think of to prevent it from happening, right? And we pride ourselves, I think, especially in the test world, we pride ourselves on that sort of level of analysis and the rigor that we put into that risk analysis, risk management, and doing those things to prevent an incident or a mishap from happening. But your world and what we're going to talk about today is once that incident does happen, because they do, despite all of our best efforts, once that incident does happen, then what? So if you could start off by just describing for folks who aren't very familiar, who have lived more on my side of the line of trying to do the preventative measures, what exactly is critical incident response?
Well, we're definitely the aftermath. So
Right,
after something that is work related, in the way of an incident, an event, an accident, uh, when something like that happens, we're there afterwards as kind of emotional first aid, if you
right,
will. And really, the whole point of that is getting you to process the event that has happened from more dimensions than just sort of an operational review, which is what we tend to do. We want to
right,
go a little deeper, kind of touching on all the senses that were affected on that. And by doing that, it helps you to process the event properly so that
mhm,
it doesn't come back to kind of haunt you later on, with these sort of unwritten reports that occur.
right,
So it's a, you know, it's a bit of a talking through the description of the event. And we have found, and there's a lot of evidence and science behind this that says that if you can do that quickly after an event,
right,
then your chances of avoiding it stemming into something like post-traumatic stress disorder is really, really great. It's sort of a positive thing if you can do that early on.
right.
And so that's where we come from. Because there's not a lot for pilots
Yeah.
in the way of support. I mean, there are therapists and doctors, but we don't like to talk to them because we're very guarded about our
No,
medicals,
say it isn't
right?
so.
Right. And so the typical response is, no, I'm good, you know. And often I hear too from people is, we trained for this, so
Right,
we're good. The funny thing is, through all the, 26 years worth of check rides that I have had, and from what I hear from the test pilot world and flight test engineer, through all their events that they go through regularly, that they set up for, they brief on, they conduct. If something goes wrong in those, we're really bad at saying, okay, now let's talk about the effects of stress and trauma on the human body and what you can do to mitigate that. We
right.
don't teach that.
Yeah. So you mentioned pilots and sort of their natural disposition to be, hey, I'm good, I've got it, maintain an even strain, all of the classic verbiage, right? And I think the phrase you hear a lot is we know how to compartmentalize. We know how to put that thing, whatever it is, that could impact our decision making, our our ability to execute in a compartment somewhere and get on with the mission, get on with the task. But at the end of the day, that thing is still in that compartment somewhere. And what you're talking about is at some point you've got to address that thing in that compartment because it's just not going to go away.
Yep.
It,
So,
so, so we talk, I mean, I guess we're framing this, and I talk a lot on the podcast, of course, about aviation stuff, but this isn't just limited to aviation incidents, is it?
well, it's not. I mean, it started with firefighters, and
Okay.
then it was this concept of peer-to-peer, and then police officers, and then even into emergency rooms and first responders. It didn't actually come to aviation until 1994,
Oh,
when my pilots union, they had an incident that Aloha Airlines had an event where the top of the aircraft came back, kind of rolled back. And it was quite the event. And while a lot was offered to the crew, the whole crew of that flight, they did the typical thing. I'm good. I'm fine. Thanks very
mhm.
much. We trained for this, but I'm
Right.
I'm actually good. And found that at the course of over 6 months to, because it's not an immediate fall off that you see it. So it's 6 months to about 2 years, you start to really see the effects of that event from them really not dealing with it
Right.
on an emotional level, and the fallout. And so Mimi Tompkins, one of the pilots from that accident, really sought out what do the other, what other industries have some kind of a need for this, but they've got a group of people that are not going to talk to doctors and therapists. And
Right.
what do they do? And that took her to the firefighter side, and indeed the ICISF, International Critical Incident Stress Foundation, who started this whole concept of peer to peer. And so she said, will this work for pilots as well? And they said, type A personalities? Yep, it'll work well. And so she helped with a bunch of other wonderful people at the union to bring that program to them.
Right.
So, and they suddenly found that it worked great, not just with pilots and airline pilots, but it worked great with accident investigators after an accident. In actual fact, we found that out of our accident investigators, and understand that each accident investigator that's a pilot for an airline, they get put through a program jointly with the NTSB, and that costs about $10,000 a person to get through
Right.
that full training. And we found after one accident that not only did 60 to 70% of people never work another accident again, which you learn so much more in an accident than you do in a book,
Sure.
right? And out of that 60 to 70%, unfortunately, a high percentage, 70 to 80%, left the industry of aviation altogether within 2 years.
Wow.
So we were losing people completely. And
Right.
we found that it was because of the emotional effects of that and not being able to deal with it and talk through it.
Right.
So when we integrated CIRP into part of the response for the accident investigators, we actually found that that completely cut down that loss. And we
Wow.
now have like a 99% return.
Wow. That's impressive. Um, okay, so now you've described sort of what it is, and when I think about obviously I started my flying career in the military, so that's a very rigid organizational structure. Each squadron has its people who do specific things. You have your safety officer, you have your operations officer, you have your maintenance officer, and they go for their whatever the required training is so they can perform that job for the squadron for the time that they're assigned there. And then I went out into industry and in the world of aviation, and again exposed to there's people who have specialties and stuff. So when you look at an organization, and you wanted to decide who exactly in an organization, and let's say it's a flying organization just because it's something we're all familiar with, who could benefit from this type of training?
Well, at the top of the list are definitely pilots, flight test engineers, those individuals that are not going to be likely to come forward and say, I mean, raise a hand and say, hey, this bothered me more than I realized.
Right.
And I'm getting some reactions to it. And can I talk to somebody about it? We're just not going to do it. Like you said, we actually don't even acknowledge that often, the
Hmm.
reactions. We compartmentalize it so much. And it's how I explain we always have these kind of unwritten reports that don't get fully written. And so they stack up and then they come back to bite us at the worst opportune time, usually another event. And then it overwhelms our coping mechanisms. And that's when we can really shut down. And it can cause real problems, even from a safety standpoint, because
Right.
it can lead to a freeze phase. So, anybody who's in that kind of world where they're going to be the first to go, no, I'm good. I'm good. I'm
Mhm.
fine, are probably the best ones to do that. But we've also found that integrating it into entire companies in different departments, whether it's sort of dispatching a group. So within the airline world, it would be dispatchers and schedulers and rampers and mechanics. And that also kind of is similar within the manufacturing world too, where you have the different departments,
Right.
and you not only have the test engineers, but you also have the other side of things, even the folks that are sort of scheduling some of this because it does affect them.
Right.
And so if you have peers trained, which is the beauty of this, is it's your own people that you get trained, and then it's your program, and you own it, and you operate it how you want to operate it. I'm just one of the instructors that teaches you to do that.
Right.
They can go back, and within their department, they're now a peer for their own folks.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's worked really well. We've seen it within the machinists, and it's been incredibly successful.
Yeah. I think that's important 'cause, throughout my career experience, I was in situations where we relied on internal folks to do whatever it was we needed to get done, especially in times of challenge or crisis. We we solved it in-house. But I've also been in situations where, and usually it was brought to us from above our higher headquarters or higher management. So, no, we're going to bring in an outside entity, whoever that may be, to help you solve your problem, to help you solve your crisis. And I accept that there are people with far more expertise in certain things than either I had or we had within our unit. But there is definitely something different about when you are trying to solve a problem, manage a crisis with people you know versus people who, while they may be experts, have come in from the outside, are going to spend a few days, maybe a few weeks at most with you, and then go away. So I think what you said there, the peer piece of this is really, really important.
Well, it's automatically a built-in trust, right? Because those are the people that we are with side by side, day by day. So there's an automatic trust there.
Right.
And that goes a long way to start. The other thing is we have our own language. I mean, aviation has its own language anyway, but even within the culture of each company or entity, they have their own
Sure.
language. And so that is really important that we can have those conversations without having to be confused about terminology. What does that mean? Having to go back and describe it and then losing the thread of what it was you were trying to say in the beginning. So I think that's really important to point out too, is it's our own culture, it's our own language, and that makes a big difference.
I'll pick up my discussion with Louise in the next episode, but there are some links in the show notes that will get you to more information if you're interested. And until next time, be safe, be smart, and be ready to be on condition. Thanks for listening.
On Condition is brought to you by Time to Climb. Motivate your team to succeed, accelerate toward your goals, and elevate to a higher level of performance. On the web at www.time2climb.com.